It was a routine night in the skies over the United States. TWA Flight 841, a Boeing 707, was cruising at 39,000 feet, carrying 94 passengers and crew on a journey from Tel Aviv to New York, with planned stops along the way. The passengers were relaxed, the crew was experienced, and the aircraft was performing flawlessly. But in just a matter of moments, everything would change. Without warning, the giant aircraft lurched violently. The calm night sky turned into a scene of chaos as the Boeing 707 began an uncontrollable dive. The plane, once steady and level, was now hurtling toward the earth at an alarming speed. The passengers screamed as the G-forces pinned them to their seats. Overhead compartments burst open, sending luggage flying through the cabin. The flight attendants, caught off guard, struggled to maintain their footing. In the cockpit, the pilots fought against an invisible force, pulling them downward. The control yoke resisted their every move, the instruments spun wildly, and warning alarms blared through the cockpit. They were in free fall, plummeting thousands of feet per minute. Every second counted. If they didn't regain control soon, the aircraft would be torn apart by the sheer force of its descent. The pilots desperately tried to understand what had happened. Had they struck turbulence? Had a mechanical failure crippled the plane? Or was something far more sinister at play? They checked their instruments, scanned the controls, and tried to stabilize the aircraft, but the descent continued. The world outside the cockpit was a blur of darkness and city lights growing ever closer. Passengers held their breath as the aircraft continued its terrifying fall. Prayers were whispered, hands were held, and eyes were shut tight. For many on board, this felt like the end. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the descent slowed. The pilots, using every ounce of skill and experience, managed to bring the aircraft back under control. The plane leveled off, the violent shaking subsided, and silence filled the cabin. It was over. But the questions had only just begun. What had caused TWA Flight 841 to plunge from the sky? The pilots were just as baffled as the passengers. Nothing in their years of training had prepared them for what had just occurred. Had there been a mechanical failure? An autopilot malfunction? A structural issue with the aircraft? As soon as they regained control, they radioed air traffic control and requested an emergency landing. The aircraft was inspected upon arrival, but no immediate explanation could be found. Everything appeared to be in working order. Investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board and aviation experts were called in to determine what had happened that night. They examined the flight data, interviewed the pilots, and inspected every inch of the Boeing 707. What they found was both shocking and mysterious. The evidence pointed to an unusual cause, one that would lead to speculation, controversy, and a decades-long debate. The official report suggested that a mechanical issue had played a role in the sudden dive, but some experts weren't convinced. One theory suggested that a malfunction in the aircraft's control surfaces had caused the plane to go into a dive without pilot input. Another theory pointed to external interference, perhaps even an act of sabotage. Some even speculated about the possibility of a missile strike, given the geopolitical tensions of the time. But perhaps the most controversial theory came from the flight crew itself. The pilots insisted that they had not made any errors, nor had they encountered any turbulence or mechanical warning before the dive began. They stood by their version of events, claiming that the cause remained unknown. To this day, the true reason behind the near disaster remains one of aviation's greatest unsolved mysteries. TWA Flight 841 defied explanation, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and chilling reminders of how quickly a routine flight can turn into a battle for survival. For the passengers and crew of Flight 841, it was a night they would never forget. And for the world of aviation, it was a case that would haunt investigators for years to come.